First of all, as I was saying, it's about time. I think we've spoken about this interview for quite a while now, and I've been looking forward to this for ages. Obviously, because I'm excited about the Dax Hunter Files. But to give everyone a bit of a background as to who you are, this is my dad, Gary Albyn. He's an author, and he's written two beautiful African-style poem books. He's written a bug-out bag. And then today we're going to be talking about the Dax Hunter Files, the sixth book that you're going to be releasing this month. And I'm really proud, Dad. I think that you've done exceptional work. Obviously, you've spent years pouring your heart and soul into the Dax Hunter Files. A lot of love and research has gone into it. I know people have dubbed it a faction, which is taking a lot of historical facts and putting them into a fictional story. And yeah, it's taken a powerful story from being a very gripping thriller stories, and now it's gone into a very deep spiritual side. And I think just a bit of a background, when you were in South Africa, every breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we would go into quite a lot of conversations down the rabbit hole in terms of what's happening globally now, as well as what's historically happened. And you've incorporated a lot of that into the Dax Hunter Files. So today I want to speak about that, the book and the characters. So just as a bit of an introduction to those who aren't familiar with the Dax Hunter Files, what is the book about, or the series?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your show, Paj. I really appreciate it, and keeping it in the family, as they say. Uh, so you mentioned that I've written had written two previous books before I launched into the Dax Hunter Files. The first one was Manzovo, Place of the Elephants, which, as the name implies, was an African elephant story. Motivated by the success of that book, I did another one. The first one was illustrated by world-renowned artist Craig Bone. The second one was illustrated by world-renowned artist Fuzz Caforio. Fuzz is a beautiful Johannesburg-based artist. And he helped me with the second book, which is a leopard-themed book. So the urge was always there. Growing up, I knew as a kid that I wanted to be a writer. In fact, I had an incredible encounter with an elephant in the Mana Pools up in the northern part of Zimbabwe when I was 9 years old. And that, I think that spurred this idea. I said to my dad when we were driving home after that week-long excursion, I said, Dad, I'm going to write a book about elephants. And just didn't realize it would take me 30-odd years to do that. But you'll recall, you were very young then, but you'll recall the time and the effort that went into that, and then compiling it. Obviously, we had to wait for Craig Bone to do 111 beautiful illustrations for the book. I wanted one for each of the verses, 111 verses. And the book went on to be a bestseller in South Africa, which was great for my morale as a writer, first time around. It provided the impetus to get me going on the second book, the one which was only recently published. Although I wrote it more than 10 years ago, it's taken a long time, especially me living in America now. Trying to find a publicist who will publish an African-themed story is not an easy task, as you can imagine. But despite that little hurdle, in the meantime, when I first got to America, I was visiting here on a visitor's visa. And I couldn't work, but I knew that there were several good reasons why I wanted to stay in America. First of all, having met Kathy, my beautiful wife, and opportunities as well. I didn't want to jeopardize the opportunities that lay ahead of me by working illegally. So I said to Kathy, here's my chance to write that novel that I've always wanted to write. So with a heap of encouragement, she sent me on my way, and I locked myself in the room and I started writing Legion of Warriors. The story was actually semi-autobiographical to the point, or to the extent that it incorporated a hero, Dax Hunter, who was, like myself, a keen aviator. He flew in the Rhodesian Air Force, whereas I only stayed in the Air Force for a short while. He was a qualified helicopter pilot during the Bush War, and it made sense from my point of view, having already flown helicopters, that my hero be a helicopter pilot from the point of view of ease of description. I could speak with authority on those aspects. And it's not a book on aviation. I didn't want it to be purely on aviation. but it provided the foundation for the story. And the story grew from the original intention of just capturing the essence, the zeitgeist of Zimbabwe at that time, Rhodesia as it was called then. It grew into something a lot more with a lot more scope. It was a sweeping spy thriller with of course a mandatory bad guy, Morozov from the KGB. And I incorporated, as all good novelists do, I incorporated a love interest, lots of action, lots of drama. All throughout, I was intent on incorporating fact, actual history. And soon after I finished the book, I sent off a couple of sample chapters to a publicist or a potential publicist in the UK. And she wrote back after a few days and she said, you told me that your book was historical fiction. She said, here in the UK, we actually call it faction. And you mentioned faction a little while ago when she explained it's a portmanteau word combining fact and fiction. Well, that set the scene for the next book. I was suitably buoyed by the way the reception to the book, and decided that I'd write a second one. That one was titled Red Talon, and it's now changed to A Banner of Nights. So the third book was A Brood of Vipers. The fourth book, A Bastion of Truth. Book 5, A Crisis of Faith. And then the next book, which we release in 2 weeks' time, is A Creed of Saints, due for publication on the 26th of this month.
Amazing. Sure, Dan. No, it's a big journey, I think, in terms of what you've gone through and getting the story out there. And obviously, publishing one book is no easy feat, but now having to have done 6 and the great response that you're getting, because I know that books 1 and 3 are packed with intense historical action. As you mentioned, there's Rhodesia, there's Zimbabwe's independence, the Falklands in book 2. And now starting with book 4, as you've mentioned now, Bastion of Truth, the tone definitely deepens quite significantly. So obviously there's a commonality within the whole story, but just a short summary of those Dax Hunter Files and that transition from the protagonist kind of, and I guess also art imitates life. You know, your journey from or into your spirituality as well. I think you've definitely drawn inspiration from that, and I think that's a huge point in book 4, 5, and 6. So yeah, just a little bit of a summary of the Dax Hunter Files from being great espionage thriller to now a lot more significantly spiritual.
So what happened, Paige, was I finished book 3 in around about 2022. I think it was 2021. I was, if I could use the word transitioning, I'd always believed in God, but I was only a partial Christian. In fact, I wasn't a Christian. I couldn't call myself a Christian because the definition is or it's not difficult to mess up, in the sense that loving God and loving nature and seeing the beauty in nature is not enough. It's we are compelled to go down on bended knee and to accept Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior as a result of the suffering he endured on the cross for our salvation. And I realized that not because I'd finished book 3, but at the end of book 3, I came to that conclusion through my own personal journey. And it had been a long journey from way back. And you'll even remember the wide and arching scope of my explorations in my place in the universe, if I could say that. So with book 3 behind me, and with the newfound Christian faith, I had what can only be described as a download. And it was a tap on the shoulder. God was telling me that Dax Hunter, the hero of the book, had to also go through a transformation similar to my own. So there I was, poised at the beginning of book 4, A Bastion of Truth, and I didn't want to just drop it on the reader that, you know, Dax Hunter suddenly wakes up and he's a Christian. I needed to use the influence of his beautiful American wife, as a long-standing Christian, to slowly draw him towards this truth, which was similar to what had happened with Kathy and I. She had fulfilled that same role in my journey. I then set about writing the book in a way that I could best convey the slow awakening that Dax had towards the final realization that his only salvation, or that his salvation, lay only in Jesus Christ. And that happened right at the very end of the book in a very dramatic showdown with one of the evil protagonists in the book. The beauty of it was that it was, I think, not only more readable, but more plausible as well. It was reflective from the point of view that it reflected my own journey. And it was once again written with a strong sense of personal immersion. I wasn't speaking as an outsider. I was speaking for myself on behalf of Dax, and putting those experiences in his own encounters and timeframes and what have you as the book progressed. So the astute reader might worry that from book 4 onwards, the theme of the story changes, or the tenor of the stories change. They don't at all. In fact, on the contrary, with Dax's newfound faith, he becomes more of a target to the evil overlords that he's trying to expose. And we know that they're out there, that they exist. Dax he's pressed into all sorts of situations which are terrible, demonic, dangerous, and all along the excitement grows. But for the reader who has a concern that maybe only the first 3 books are worth the read, I will say to them clearly that the action sequences are as vivid, as engaging as in the preceding books.
No, I think, thank you for that. I mean, it's such a personal reflection on your life as well. And it's really interesting to know that obviously the protagonist has gone on his journey, but the books are still action-packed. And just a bit of a backstory. I mean, you used to tell us all these, what I would consider back in the day, these conspiracy theories. But as my faith has grown, and as as I do a lot more research myself, and you realize these far-fetched stories that sometimes sounded extremely outrageous, because they were just too, you use the word evil, they were just too evil to believe, are now coming true, or not coming true, they're coming to light. Like the global elite, that was quite a weird one. I often used to say to people, there was a couple of families that ruled the world, and they were like, oh, not this again. But now with the uncovering of, or just the way in which the world is going, we can see that this is quite frankly quite evident. There's things like the Epstein files, the child sacrifices, the elite family gatherings. All of this seemed very far-fetched, but you've incorporated a lot of that into your book. You've done a lot of research, and I think that's where a lot of our conversations when we're having breakfast, lunch, or dinner, they go into these rabbit holes. But it's truly frightening, and I think a lot of people are becoming fully aware of what is happening globally and what has been happening for centuries, with these secret societies and all of that. So you've incorporated a lot of that information into the Dax Hunter Files. You're very historically accurate in terms of your research. So yeah, I think there's obviously a real world inspiration there.
So what happened was when I wrote A Legion of Warriors, as I mentioned earlier, that was the first book. I was wanting to capture a history, a forgotten history. And I wanted to honor the fallen heroes of that war. But I also wanted to convey that history in as impartial a manner as possible. And that was what drew me towards the history. So I spent a lot of time researching. In fact, I spent a lot of time researching all of my books, but that was a real eye-opener to me as an aspirant author, coming to the conclusion that such books require a studious amount of attention to detail, or studious application, I should say, of research for the sake of accuracy. So, whereas book 1 was fairly linear exciting but linear in terms of the progress of the plot. Multiple plots, but linear nonetheless. They all, every sequence built towards the final sequence. There were no loose ends. I try not to leave loose ends at the end of each book, but occasionally there is a little Easter egg that I'll drop in, which readers will pick up when they read subsequent books. And, oh yes, okay, I remember that character. That was clever the way he brought that back in. But what happened was, end of book one was modestly successful. I was seeing a lot of good feedback from the Amazon readers, and it prompted me to write the second book. Now, whereas you'll recall that I was always eager to tell anyone who cared to listen about the conspiracy theories back in the day, and we're talking 15, 20 years ago, I didn't necessarily set out to do that or to incorporate that in book two, but I did want to start delving into it, hinting at it, and building on this idea of being a faction writer. In fact, I think I've perfected the art of massaging the fiction to fit the fact rather than the other way around. So what happened was, during some casual research that I was doing, I had this idea that Dax Hunter's brother, who was a year or two younger than him, who desperately wanted to fight in the Rhodesian Bush War, didn't make it because of his age, but still had this yearning to go and fight in a war somewhere. So he, like many young Rhodesians and Zimbabweans since then, joined the Royal Marines in the United Kingdom. And I was able, with some previous experience that I had, and I'll talk about that in a moment, at the Ronin Bodyguard Academy in Cape Town, I'd met along the way hundreds of students who hailed particularly from the Royal Marines. So I built up a pretty comprehensive understanding of their ethos, how they think. Even it's a very tight-knit unit, as you can well imagine. And I just thought it would be great to pay a homage to those former students. So Claude and Hunter was sent to the Falklands, 1982, and I started doing some research. I wanted to be accurate in my portrayal of events on that opening day, the opening salvo of the Falklands War. And in my research, I came across a British author by the name of Ricky D. Phillips. And I reached out to Ricky because he seemed to have a rather unusual perspective on the way that the war had gone, one that has not been widely publicized, or in fact even suppressed, to the point where the facts were lost to history for political reasons on both sides, Galtieri in Argentina and Margaret Thatcher in the United Kingdom. And he had unearthed this, and he had written a book, a very successful book in the UK, called The Last Casualty. And he very happily responded to my email. I wrote to him and I said, I'm writing this book and I would like to incorporate as much fact as I possibly can in the raid that happened, the Argentine raid on the islands on the 2nd of April. And he started sending me notes and newspaper cuttings, articles, just an unbelievable resource. And in fact, he ended up writing the foreword to that book, for which I'm eternally grateful. Ricky planted the seed, and from that, I started doing a deep dive myself, and I started realizing that there was a lot more going on behind the scenes in the Falklands than had been let on in the newspaper articles and the books that had been written. For example, covert support of the Argentines from Israel, of all countries. And it harked back to an insult that had been heaped upon Prime Minister Begin, was the head of Ogun in Israel during the time of, or pre-Israel, during the time of the British Protectorate of Palestine. And one of his best friends was executed for committing a crime against the British government. And Begin never forgave the slight or the injustice. And he had his revenge 35 years later when he decided that he was going to show the British and to supply the Argentines with much needed arms, ammunition, and material during that conflict. So that set up a deep dive into the machinations, if you will, of world politics. And of course, Morozov, the bad guy, was still around. And he was a bit of a rogue agent, but somebody who was much stronger character than him, saw the potential of this man and decided he would rope him in and use him as one of his private assassins. And that character's name was Putilin, who's loosely based on a president of a similar name. Anyway, that was where we first hear of Putilin in my book. And from there were a deep dive into all sorts of other goings on around the world. And as a sidebar, I got a beautiful note from Ricky just a couple of months ago. Obviously, he got a copy of the second book, A Banner of Nights, in which he wrote the foreword. He read it, loved it, and he wrote to me and he said, Gary, I am doing research at the moment for a follow-up book of my own. You will not believe that much of what you wrote as fiction in your second book is actually being unearthed as pure fact today. And he said, this is explosive stuff. And he said, I don't know how you did it. I don't know if you're a secret agent and you've got connections with the Mossad or whoever, but it was a great compliment because that is sometimes that is the intention. Sometimes that is just a fortuitous outcome. But either way, what happened was prompted me to continue with that theme in book 3. By the end of that book, obviously, is when I had found Jesus as my Lord and Savior, and decided that the subsequent books were going to follow a journey that was that could be mirrored by my own journey and spoken or written with some sense of compassion.
There's a lot of unsettling themes in A Crisis of Faith, obviously with the deliberate manipulation of faith, religion, and truth itself. What do you see as some of the biggest ways in which the global agendas are trying to erode biblical truth and national sovereignty right now? And how do you try to show this through Dax's eyes without the story sounding preachy?
This is a rabbit hole, as you can well imagine. I think the greatest tool available to the elites in terms of manipulating humanity, society, is our naivete. I'm talking about us collectively, humanity. We are reluctant to accept the fact that we're regarded as players. We're regarded by the elites as useless eaters. This is quoted. It's easily verifiable. And they being the elites, are intent on manipulating us to the point where they can use us for their own nefarious ends. And this goes back into the histories, the sands of time, the history of time, talking about the ancient orders, the secret societies, each of them linked in some way to a demonic order, which is once again fact and verifiable, not just in the Bible. It's it doesn't take much of an historian or a researcher to verify these claims. And as you recall from 20 odd years ago, you probably thought that I was a little outlandish or was making some outlandish claims. But now they are easily identifiable, and they're evident wherever we look. I give you an example: the Georgia Guidestones, a set of granite steels that were erected in a fashion not dissimilar to Stonehenge, and inscripted on there in 7 different languages were the rules for the future world. And I know we're starting to get into the realm of the uncomfortable here, but people must realize that the adherence to these dark and satanic cults and societies are worshipping the dark side. They are aligned with Lucifer, and it is their intention ultimately to disrupt humanity, and in fact probably even taint humanity's DNA. In the Bible, it speaks about the mark of the beast, and there is a lot of evidence pointing towards the fact that the mark of the beast might be something akin to a gene splice, a DNA altering device that takes away our humanity. In other words, it re-engineers our bodies biologically so that we cannot be salvaged in the Christian context. Our spirits will not be saved. And you need look no further than the intent, the malice that is evident in, for example, company names. The World Economic Forum, which has been propounding these despicable rules and regulations and political directives for a good few decades now under Klaus Schwab, even their logo is imbued with the 666 emblem. Very subtle, but once you see it, it's unmissable. And that's just one example. There are others. There are dozens of others where the 666, the 666 sign, which is the sign of the beast, is flaunted. It's absolutely thrown in our faces. Google Chrome, you mentioned Google just now. The Google Chrome emblem is 666. Walt Disney, that one's got 3 sixes in it. The bite, even the Apple logo, the bite in the apple.
The root of all sin.
It's all symbolic. It's all intentional and symbolic. Monster energy drink, for example, if anyone cares to go and research that, it's a rabbit hole, but it's well worth looking at. One of their biggest backers is BlackRock, and BlackRock, nobody knows who the main shareholders are of BlackRock because it is so carefully obfuscated. But if you just look at the wealth of the individuals, the top wealthy individuals in the world, it's not difficult, I should say, to deduce from that they are in fact the prime bankers, the primum argentarios of the New World Order, the coming New World Order. So these are themes that I've picked up in books 4, 5, and now 6. Scott, my co-author in book 6, came alongside in book 4 as an assistant. He helped me with a couple of the chapters that were of a technical nature. He is an AI expert. He's a world expert on AI, and I needed somebody of his expertise to help with some of the chapters. But he's also a devout Christian, and he is an expert in eschatology. So he helped enormously with books 4 and 5. When both of those books, well, certainly when book 5 was finished, I approached Scott and I said to him, given your inputs on the last couple of books, would you be interested in co-authoring book 6? It took him a couple of days to respond in the affirmative, but eventually he did. And I'm happy to say that he's glad that he's come alongside to co-author the book with me, because together I think we've created something that conveys a very important and a very profound message. So the final showdown in book 5, without giving away too much, we end with the Christian rapture, the taking up of the Christians into heaven. And book 6, the bulk of book 6 is actually written in the future. So it's talking about the time leading up to the start of the tribulation. We can't tell for certain from the biblical passages, Ezekiel and Daniel, Isaiah, and of course Revelation. We can't tell exactly how long it takes from the rapture to the start of the tribulation itself. We know what triggers the start of the tribulation. We just don't know how long it is. So we used a little bit of authorial liberty to compress that timeline into a period of approximately 60 days, leading up to the end of Book 6, which is a profound culmination of everything that we had incorporated, including UFOs, UAPs, the big PR exercise, if I could call it that, that's going on at the moment surrounding UAPs, especially considering the release of the government documents by President Trump just a week ago. It's all aimed at A, causing a distraction, and B, at sowing confusion amongst the Christians. That's what they want to do. They want as many confused Christians as possible to possibly not necessarily surrender their faith, but to start questioning the veracity of the truths that we're hearing now. And I say truths loosely because they are not truths, they are obfuscations.
So you obviously, with having such great insights, with Scott obviously creating the sixth book, I mean, just talking about what Trump's released now with the UAPs and the UFOs and all of that. I mean, also again, for the past, my whole entire life, actually of 36 years now, it always just seems so far-fetched. And I know it's to sow confusion and to have people think that there's extraterrestrials out there instead of interdimensional beings, which in another word is demonic beings, to sow that confusion. So, I mean, just as a bit of an insight, what's happening in America at the moment with this information, and is there a lot of talk about people's understanding of what's really happening, or are people just kind of looking at this as a given truth?
What has happened is it's highly topical, obviously, especially with the way that the media has been brought in. The media is a tool, obviously, of they're a tool, an intentional tool of the elites in the ushering in of the New World Order, the Great Reset that's coming. And the release, for example, in November last year, I think it was in November, of a documentary called Age of Disclosure. I forget the name of the director, but a very credible director with an impeccable record in documentary making. But the timing wasn't accidental, especially when you put that alongside the release, or the forthcoming release of Steven Spielberg's new movie called Disclosure Day, which comes out in a month or two, if I'm not mistaken. And then you have the release of the Trump documents, the official government documents, which have been kept under wraps for all of these years since Roswell back in the 40s, 47, I think it was, or early 50s maybe. These are not, they're not coincidental, they're planned. They've been carefully pre-planned as part and parcel of the drip, the psychological drip of teasing citizens into making assumptions or jumping to conclusions about what these are. And the reality of the situation is that millions and millions of Christians are going to be raptured in the future. We don't know when. Nobody should ever try and speculate what date it is. But there are many things happening in the world at the moment which are indicative of a gathering storm. In fact, they've been prophesied in the Bible in great detail. And dare I say, for example, terrible, terrible storms in South Africa. I'm not saying that South Africa has been targeted, but there's been an increase, a dramatic increase in the frequency of earthquake activity in America, for example. These are all prophecy. There's a huge weather pattern forming across the Northern Pacific at the moment. And these can't be disregarded or dismissed as just mere coincidence. The rapture that I mentioned is going to take millions, hundreds of millions of people up to heaven. And there has to be a credible reason for those left behind as to what has just happened. And what they're doing is they're setting up the narrative right now by saying that the evidence of all the UFO activity that has been released, that has been corroborated and verified by certain sources, is all going to point towards a mass alien abduction. That is going to be the narrative. And of course, the media is going to play a very important part in that. And we know that by and large, all media is to some extent manipulated or bought and paid for. So we are, to coin a phrase, we are living in interesting times.
Not just for anyone that's feeling a little bit uneasy. I mean, it's, yeah, we are living in very interesting times. And I think what's amazing is that you've taken the Dax Hunter Files and you've incorporated all of this as a story for people to read. But it also, I think, triggers a lot of inner questioning in terms of, why are we being manipulated so much? Why is there a huge push from the elite families to deceive us? And it's obviously because they're afraid of what's on the other side. And that's why I wanted to chat to you. I mean, it's not just a promotional chat about your books. I think the message and what you're trying to convey is super important for people to equip themselves in terms of understanding the global elite's agenda. I mean, we've had a lot of manipulated pandemics. We've got another scare now with the hantavirus coming out as well. I mean, that's part of the agenda as well. And I just hope that by people reading your book and understanding and having their eyes open to what the reality is happening or what's at play here, that we can be a little bit more discerning on our next steps as humanity and how we play our part. I think with the more information and the more knowledge we're equipped with, we'll be less likely to be led astray. So as much as there's a lot of deep information that you presented today, I think it is super important for people to equip themselves with this knowledge. Yeah, in terms of understanding how we progress forward, how we move forward with our faith.
We are facing an enemy. We know the outcome. Christians know the outcome, and my hope is that the book actually reaches a wide audience of non-believers and gets them to realize the truth and that their salvation is guaranteed through Jesus Christ. A Christian reading the book will just nod and say, yes, that's plausible. That's what I believe. That's what Christians do believe. But they're not my target audience.
I just find it so interesting of how the evil side of things are just they're on a fast track now. They're on a big fast track. And it's been centuries.
Yeah, it's been centuries in the making, and it's coming to a head. There's so much to talk about, but in ancient Rome, there was a saying coined by one of the emperors called panem et circenses, Latin, meaning bread and circuses. And the logic is that if you're the emperor, if you provide enough bread and enough entertainment on Saturday afternoon, you're golden.
Yeah.
You're going to keep the masses happy. And the elite, have perfected that now to the point where, for example, Super Bowl Sunday in America, for the last 8-9 years, the halftime show is just it's an homage to Satan every time. And they know that because so many people are there for the football because they're bouncing up and down for their team. And if they just expended that same amount of energy towards God or even their church, we would be a different society, a completely different society. But we've been so easily manipulated, and they know how to do it. The Hegelian dialectic was something else that I wanted to mention. Essentially suggests that the typical democracy in America, the Republicans and the Democrats, they're just two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, exactly.
Different sides of the same coin, or two wings of the same bird. It's crazy. It really is when you look into it. And I delved into that. You've read the books, dived into it. There's no one's immune. It's just everywhere.
I mean, for me, because I've always been quite interested in Hollywood as a youngster growing up, I've seen it deteriorate in such a way where it's you can just it's so obvious now in terms of how they're using pop culture. You see the Sam Smiths of the world or the Taylor Swifts doing witch chants on stage, and they're harvesting our energy. So it would be quite interesting to maybe dive into that next time. Is that battle for our souls? Our energetic
Yeah.
life force. I think that would be quite a super interesting take because for a lot of people, maybe from my generation who have grown up with a lot of pop culture, who can now take a step back and actually see that this, your Beyoncés of the world as well, you can see that there's superstars that have been killed off the minute they start speaking about God, or, and I think that might be an interesting take because people can say, oh, okay, actually, I know about this and I can see it. Now I can actually digest it maybe a little bit easier. So it might also be quite an interesting thing.
So many rabbit holes to go down, and I really look forward to this becoming a regular feature. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you doing this for me, love.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for your time. I mean, as I said in the beginning, obviously I'm a huge fan because I'm your daughter, but also the richness of the content that you've written. I think it's so important for the world, for people, as you said, Christians and non-Christians, or to digest and all the information that you put out there for everyone to kind of make it a big decision. For me, it's an interesting thing. I've had in the past a rocky relationship with my faith because of the global elites and how they've taken this beautiful book, the Bible, and manipulated in such a way with, certain churches that are these pastors that are coming in and manipulating the message quite a bit. And for me, then I confused that with what the Bible actually contained. And I've had two beautiful experiences, one where I know I met God, and then the one recently, I think it was last year, March, where I actually had an encounter with Jesus Christ, which it was the most obvious, beautiful experience in my life. And from that, I've had to kind of go backwards and start over, and knowing that it's all true is now getting a lot of the content and reading the Bible and scripture, and it's a beautiful journey. And I hope that a lot of people do explore their faith a lot more. And I've said it before, just being privy to information, knowledge is power. But I guess what we do with that knowledge is the power. And yeah, I'm really excited for book 6 to come out. A Creed of Saints is going to be quite the message, quite the novel. And yeah, with the global cabal and the elites manipulating so much, I think it's a lot for people to start getting interested in their faith and starting to look to God and Jesus and starting to see the truth, the way, and the light. So thank you so much for giving us a full overview of the Dax Hunter Files and also taking us on a journey with how Dax grows his faith and understands, his place in the world. And I think that there's a huge, important message that you've conveyed in these books, and they're very powerful. And I wish you all the greatest success. And I just want to say that I'm really proud of you. And for anyone who's interested in purchasing your books, where would be the best place to get those?
So they're available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble in America, Canada as well. Amazon is available in ebook, Kindle, it's called, paperback, and on Barnes and Noble, paperback and hardcover.
Amazing. I actually wish that I had in the background all of your books, obviously with missing the Creed of Saints. So I look forward to getting my hands on that copy. But thank you so much for your time, Pops. I really appreciate it. And this hopefully is the first of many. I hope we've piqued a lot of people's interest. And yeah, lots of love, Dad. Thank you.
I appreciate you, love. I really do.